With Putin to the east, Trump to the west, and Brexit on the way, the leaders of Germany, Italy, and Spain are hosted at the Palace of Versailles by France's president, officially to prepare Europe's 60th birthday party. This time, though, there's a true sense that what's needed is more than just a four-way photo op. Do the continent's biggest powers choose the option of putting European integration into overdrive, with much closer ties on issues like defense, tax harmonization, trade, a common view on borders, mixed messages from Washington on NATO, EU and Germany bashing from the new US president, coupled with Kremlin support for anti-Brussels candidates in places like France, Britain, and the Netherlands, have certainly exposed the EU's weaknesses. Germany's chancellor faces particularly tough choices in this an election year. Angela Merkel hails from a nation that's traditionally wary of military spending and inflation. Can she sell closer ties with her Latin dinner table companions back home to her voters? When the dust settles, what will the EU look like? Today in the France 24 debate, can Europe switch gears? With us from Berlin is Jörg Vorbrig of the German Marshall Fund. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
From Brussels, Peter Kleppe, fellow at the Open Europe think tank. Welcome back to the show.
Good evening.
Also in the European capital, Paolo Accardo, the editor of WENTE Europe. Thanks for joining us. And from Warsaw, Marcin Zabrowski, senior associate at Visigoth Insight, the author of Germany, Poland, and Europe. Nice to see you. The France 24 debate,
Hello.
where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Ahead of the summit, François Hollande called for a Europe with, quote, different speeds. If not, the continent will explode, he says. We already have a two-speed Europe, as you can see here. 28 nations inside of the EU, soon to be 27. Half of them, 19, who share the euro as a common currency. Are we headed, if we listen to the remarks made by the French president, I'll put it to you first, Jörg Vorbrig. In an interview he gave to 6 European newspapers, the French president talked about a structured cooperation to help countries go further towards a federal Europe. Do you see the prospect of, well, at least a 3-speed Europe, perhaps?
Well, to be honest, we have seen that discussion before. If we go back to the mid-90s, then we will remember, especially here in Germany, that there was a serious proposal for a core Europe to emerge. And it seems some of the debate, as we see it today, especially dramatically put by President Hollande, goes in a very similar direction. There seems to be traction again for such an idea, most certainly. There is the pressures that were also described earlier on. But to be honest, I still am skeptical about this. This seems to be a rehashing of a debate that we have seen before, and I'm not sure the prospects for this core Europe to emerge this time around are much better than they were in the past.
Paolo Accardo, you agree?
Yes, one can be skeptical looking back to the past experiences that Europe has seen in the last 60 years. Also, so there are many reasons to be quite skeptical, and also because the proposal comes from France, which is one of the countries that is more resisting towards more integration, more European integration. France has been, starting from General de Gaulle, one of the countries that wanted to keep the most of its national powers to itself. So one can be skeptical, and also looking at the possible outcome of the French presidential election, one also can be skeptical about what France would be doing in a way of proposing a more cohesive and even more federal Europe.
What are you suggesting, that none of the candidates are more federal in their approach?
Well, certainly not Mr. Mélenchon, certainly not Madame Le Pen. Mr. Fillon is leaning towards the right sovereignist part of the electorate, which is fiercely fiercely nationalist, and Mr. Macron is probably the candidate with the most, let's say, Europhile program, along with Mr. Hamon from the Socialist Party. But until now, they didn't really commit to a federal Europe. In France, it's considered like something that only the Greens were talking about, or the Centre Party, which is not taking part to the election now.
Peter Kleppe, let me ask you about the people that are sitting down in Versailles, because oftentimes it's been sort of the traditional thing is whenever there's a big summit coming up in the past, it was always a two-way sit-down between the German Chancellor and the French President, whoever that might be. Then we saw last summer, or a couple of times, where there was the Italian Prime Minister, Matteo Renzi. Now we have this four-way sit-down with the Prime Minister of Spain. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it reduces the weight of the summit, because the fact that Poland, for example, is not there raises some questions. I mean, why invite Spain, which is more or less about the size of Poland? Now, more fundamentally, what President Hollande has said is that he sort of wants to save the EU by allowing groups of countries to transfer more powers to the EU level, to harmonize taxation and etc. So I don't think this is going to save the EU. This is precisely what people are annoyed about. I think, on the contrary, we don't need to scrap, of course, the whole idea of Europe, but if the EU would do where it is actually qualified, which is to fight national protectionism, to scrap trade barriers, I think the EU could be popular again, but not by transferring more powers in terms of taxation to Brussels.
Marcin Zabrowski, are you miffed that Poland wasn't invited? That why these four?
Hello?
Marcin, can you hear me?
Włączył mnie pan.
All right, we seem to have lost the connection with Warsaw. We'll try to get it reconnected. Let me get your reaction, Jörg, from what Peter Kleppe just said, that basically the EU would be a lot more popular if it was more concentrated on trade and not the rest.
Well, certainly from the end of German public opinion, this is not true. There's a very strong sentiment in Germany that those countries in the European Union that would like to integrate more closely should do so. About 3/4 of the German population say so. So this is certainly not a call from among citizens for a concentration of the European Union on a few select areas, but there is certainly a broader sentiment that the EU is the space where countries need to move together more closely and can do more, and that those countries, in the eyes of the overwhelming majority of Germans, that those countries that wish to do so should be going ahead with this.
And what do you think of the makeup of Merkel and the three Latins, if you will?
Well, you know, I'm a bit of a Polonophile myself. I've spent a lot of time in Poland living, studying, working. So I always note immediately if Poland, a sizable EU member country, is missing from a setting like this. And it is certainly right to point out that in the EU, in terms of population, also in terms of the economy, Poland carries a similar weight to the one of Spain. So why is Spain there, why Poland is not? Now, we all know that there are internal developments in Poland that are critical, that are criticized by many in the EU, that have also led to a cooling down of the relationship, especially between Germany and Poland more recently. And those developments in the country are certainly the reason why Poland was not included in this circle that is now meeting.
All right, we have the connection back with Warsaw. Marcin Zabrowski, are you miffed that the Polish leader wasn't invited?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there were times not long ago where you would have Polish leader at the table. You'd have the meetings of 5 or 6 biggest member states, and Poland would be around, and its voice would be counted. However, this time around, we have an intensely Eurosceptic government in Poland, which is in very overt way uninterested in joining the Eurozone at any time soon. The EU certainly needs a reform, Also, we are confronted with a president of the United States which is not a friend of the EU or not even a friend of NATO. So this is quite dramatic circumstances, and the Polish government is not indicating that it has any interest in the European project. So, in many respects, I'm not surprised that that this government is missing from its place at the table.
It's hard to have a conversation when you're 27 or 28 in the room. Marcin, though, how do you feel when you hear the French president talk about a multi-speed Europe? Does that worry you? Do you think it's a good idea?
Well, it both worries me, but at the same time, I understand this logic. It worries me because with multi-speed Europe, Poland certainly would be left out of it. Certainly would be left out of the inner circle because it's not a member of the Eurozone. And it's not, and as I said before, it does have a Eurosceptic government in power, uninterested in European integration altogether. However, as much as it worries me as a Pole, as a European and then as analyst, I mean, I find it understandable that the EU must move ahead. And especially in dramatic circumstances, dramatic times in which we are now. If the EU is not moving ahead, the entire European project can actually find itself in jeopardy.
All right, one specific area where it might be where François Hollande was unequivocal was defense. And there, he even suggested that post-Brexit, Britain be part of the conversation. In my mind, the UK, even outside the EU, should be associated with a beefed up European defense. Jörg Farbrig, what's your reaction?
Well, the United Kingdom is certainly a key element of European security. There's no doubt about it. It's one of the member states, the permanent member states of the UN Security Council. It's a nuclear power. It has certainly shown its force also in recent years as Europe was trying to respond to Russian aggression in Eastern Europe. So there certainly is a role to be played for the United Kingdom, and in turn, without the United Kingdom, it would be incredibly difficult for other countries, Germany included, to compensate for the capacity and capabilities that the UK does bring to the table. So absolutely, we must have an interest in keeping the United Kingdom involved as much as we can in the security architecture.
So Peter Kleppe, even though we're on the eve of triggering Brexit, to a certain degree, there's no escaping Europe, and that even when Britain will be out, it will still be in, especially when it comes to things like defense.
Well, the EU countries, the 11 EU countries that have planned to agree a financial transaction tax under enhanced cooperation, they already don't mention to agree on that. So how would they agree on a proper EU defense? I mean, it's of course a good idea for European countries to work together on defense in an intergovernmental manner, but that's already happening at the NATO level. So unless the United States would pull out of NATO, and thank God they are not, I don't think there's any need for this duplication.
Paolo Accardo, you agree?
Yes, well, I think that European defense as intended by François Hollande, meaning with a non-EU member UK, would add another layer to NATO, which would probably complicate things within Europe. I hardly see how the UK could be part of the European defense under the European flag without being part of the European Union. It seems to me a bit complicated, and I wish President Hollande would develop a bit more in deep his idea on that.
Marcin Zabrowski, your thoughts on this, because this talk of a common European defense existed back in the 1980s, then it went away. Now with the current context in Washington, it's back. Is it pie in the sky? You've heard Peter Kleppe mention that it'll be tough getting everyone to agree.
Well, I think it's a necessary project. I mean, I think it's really unavoidable. I think the United States is clearly losing in interest in European security. Trump has been very critical of both the European Union and NATO. His Secretary of Defense, Mattis, did actually say that America's commitment to the security of Europe, to collective defense, will be moderated, depending on the Europeans' investment in their own security. It is clear that the transatlantic spirit is disappearing in the United States, is going away. And if the Europeans will not pull together the security defense
disappearing,
resources together,
or is this an outlier? Is this just a one-off?
Well, I think it is a trend. I think it's certainly a trend. I mean, we've been seeing it for some time, and it's just a radical manifestation of that under Trump. But altogether, the Americans are fed up and tired and uninterested in Europe. And the Europeans don't address that. If they don't start looking after their own security on their own, we will be just left facing, belligerent Russia and, Islamic fundamentalism on our own.
Jörg Forberg, you agree?
Well, I certainly agree that Europe needs to be investing much more into its own security. It has been a security consumer for decades, and there clearly now, after many years of discussion already about this across the Atlantic, is a situation where the Europeans have to step up to the table. So there certainly is no way avoiding an enhanced cooperation, enhanced investment into European security, be it on the EU or the NATO level. This is a secondary question. I think in the first place, this is about the Europeans taking on more responsibility. And in all fairness, I think we also have to admit that over the last years, especially under the impression of Russian aggression in Eastern Europe, Europeans have already considerably moved in this direction, and this has to continue.
We're going to pick up on these points when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.